How's it going, everybody? Tech-Tard Ted. It is Thursday, the 27th of October, 2022. I haven't been talking much about the actual goings-on the ground in Ukraine for a couple of days because it's kind of been the calm before the storm. Everybody's expecting a great offensive by the Ukrainian army in the Kherson region. What has been happening up until today, or well, within the last couple of days, is the Russians have been continuing their missile and drone offensive against the electrical grid and the infrastructure of Ukraine. And Kiev, I know, has been dark a couple of nights. I know that most of the railways are now useless unless they have diesel locomotives, which they only had a few, and they're not in the best of repair. They've not been well maintained. And Ukraine's running out of diesel, and they're running out of diesel for their tanks. So Ukraine's in a pretty precarious situation. But that's all right, folks. That's all right, because we have the great, the fantastic, the unbelievable Kherson offensive. One of the guys that I follow, who is a guru or expert on the Ukrainian military, and he happens to be a neutral party in the conflict, he says after looking at what the Ukrainians have left, they have nothing left to place this grand mythical offensive in Kherson. They don't have the troops, they don't have the equipment. He doesn't know where the Ukrainian army can get them. And while a lot of people may go all in on that, I'm still cautious about anything, because I know underestimating the Ukrainians is a bad deal. That's how you end up losing Kharkov, when you think that you can, like the Russians did when they thought they could defend the Kharkov region with a couple thousand people. The Ukrainians just massed a bunch more and swatted them. And the Russians weren't going to sacrifice their men, and they withdrew. So underestimating one side or the other is never a good game in all this. And I think we'll see within the next week or so. If the elections in the United States come off, where a lot of people believe Ukrainian aid is in the balance, depending on who keeps the purse strings, whether the Democrats get to hold on to Congress, or whether it flips entirely, which everybody's saying they're pretty sure that the House of Representatives is done deal. It's going to be going to the Republicans. A lot of people think that there's going to be a tightening of the aid, the pipeline of cash, so to speak, that's flowing to the Zelensky government. And I have a feeling that if the Ukrainians can't pull off some sort of stunning upset within the next 2 weeks, in fact, there's a lot of rumblings that they're under pressure from the Democrats and their supporters in the United States, that they need to pull off something before the election. And I think it's basically to try to help save the bacon of the Democrats. If that doesn't materialize, that's going to say a lot, because they've invested. They've not been able to mask their intentions, but maybe they've been masking the troops that they've been putting together. Everybody says, oh, they're getting together there. You know, we'll go back to the Ardennes offensive in World War II. The Germans were able to gather a bunch of troops and equipment and do a massive offensive against the United States and the Western Allies in the Ardennes region without anybody knowing. It was a terrible surprise. It was a shock. They had the sleepiest part of the line. They pushed in. Now, of course, after a couple of weeks, it all faded away and tapered off. And the Germans still ended up losing the war. But it was a big shock, and it actually prolonged things. And when the offensive came, the Americans in the sector of the Ardennes were not prepared. So underestimating the Ukrainians is a bad juju. Like I said, we'll see after the election if they are able to pull off an offensive, or more than just one of these heavy reconnaissance by fire deals that they've been doing the last couple of weeks. But there's something else going on, which is kind of interesting. Apparently, in the Donetsk region, the Russians have regained the initiative, which is interesting. I have no doubt that things were going to slow down in Ukraine. In fact, I figured they'd be slowing down and we'd be stalemated for a few weeks while we had the rains and the mud and the roads just impassable. But apparently the Russians are on the move. They're threatening to retake Krasny Liman, and they're continuing to push through Bakhmut. Bakhmut is the most major battle going on in Ukraine. It's getting almost no coverage in the Western media. And the reason it's getting no coverage is because it's not going good for the Ukrainians. Anything that's good for the Ukrainians, we're going to trumpet from the hilltops. If it's bad for the Ukrainians, well, just like the old stories about how they had neo-Nazis and in Azov and how they were corrupt, those stories, you got to squelch those. You can't let those out, because heaven forbid the American public be educated about where they're spending money or what the reality is. We'd much rather tell you pretty lies and keep you happy and keep you from questioning where your tax dollars are going. So apparently the Russians are making incremental gains and are starting to gain momentum. I have no doubt about that, because at the current moment, the mobilized troops are filtering into the Russian forces in Ukraine. And one thing that's, I don't know, it's interesting. It's a rumor. I've heard it from several people. We'll see. Is that they're going to continue mobilization. Now, it's not been officially announced by the government, but I do know that one or two instances where people I know got call-up notices in Russia within the last 2 weeks, and that's, as the mobilization was done, over with, wound down. So it seems to me that the Russians are still calling up people that they think they're going to need. Now, I haven't been able to find out, one of these guys, I haven't been able to find out what their expertise is, where they served before and that sort of thing. It's a delicate situation. I don't want to go asking tons and tons and tons of questions. A lot of the other folks I know that are getting called up have medical backgrounds or have backgrounds in technical systems. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know how that's going. I know if the mobilization continues, we'll know about it, because nobody's going to keep a secret that Cousin Sasha or Dima have been called up. The mobilization is over, and yet they're still calling folks up. This is all coming down to the inevitability. I've called this since day one. This is not something that Ukraine is going to walk out of unscathed. This is not something that Ukraine is going to walk away with the borders from January 1st of this year intact. It's just not going to happen. And anybody who has thought that's happened, you've either not been honest with yourself, or you've been drinking Kool-Aid. You've been drinking what the media has been telling you. And it's amazing to me, all these people who get totally invested in this narrative that just isn't true about Ukraine is winning, Russia is losing, the Russians are deserting, the Russians are doing this, the Russians are doing that. I think it's a shame a lot of folks didn't pay attention before this. I've been paying attention since the Maidan, probably actually before. Timoshenko, I think that's her name. I'm drawing a blank. I may be mispronouncing it. The lady that had the unique hairstyles, that was the leader of Ukraine for a while. She had a lot of nasty things to say about the Russians who lived in her country, about the ethnic Russians. She had nasty things to say. And I was aware of it then. And I thought, wow, what a strife. What a problem that you're promoting division within your own country. And then we get one president who's more about unifying, and he becomes a problem. And we have to get rid of him because he wants to bring Ukraine together. And he wants to have closer relationship with his neighbors, Russia. And he was thrown out for this because a lot of elements didn't care for him because they didn't want peace with the neighbors in their own country. There's so much that the American people are not being told about this conflict. There is so much about this conflict that's being covered up. And so is it any surprise as the Russians now look set to recapture Krasny Liman as they are continuing to push on Bakhmut, which, by the way, for anybody who's been watching this, Bakhmut has been one of those things that's been developing, it seems like, forever. I mean, literally 8 weeks, close to 2 months that they've been pushing on Bakhmut. And it's one of those things that you hardly hear covered in the news. And when you do see it covered, the reporting is just absolutely inadequate or out and out lies. Russian troops flee from Bakhmut assault. That hasn't happened. That hasn't happened. In fact, if anything, Bakhmut, the industrial zone, you got Chechens there, Russian Chechens in the industrial zone. This time the Russians got smart. They're going to take the industrial zone first because they're not going to have happen what happened in Mariupol, where the neo-Nazis decided that they were going to hold up in the Azovstal steelworks. You're not going to have what you had happen in, I guess it was, Lysychansk, where the Ukrainians again held up in the factories on the edge of town. No, what happened is they decided to go ahead and take the factory sector of the town first and deny the Ukrainians this fallback position. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens the next couple days. Now, let's caveat this, because I've watched this war. I watch how the tides turn, but I believe this is a decided turn. We'll see. Tomorrow I could be wrong. Tomorrow we could come in. There could be a massive assault. All those troops that I'm telling you that they probably don't have inciting, they might have them, and they might push in. There might be a huge shock. There might be the big dirty bomb that Putin and the Russians have been going on about, the provocation to start a nuclear war. All shall be revealed, folks. It's just going to take time and patience. And I'll be here to run my big mouth about it. So y'all take care.